good afternoon and good evening to in-house counsel from all across America. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks to today's sponsor, Contract Pod AI. Thank you for sponsoring today's presentation, and we're going to be hearing later on from Contract Pod AI's GC and Chief Evangelist, Jerry Levine, for a quick demo on the Contract Pod AI platform and on how it does redline. So I'm excited to see that. And special thanks, of course, as well to our wonderful presenter. She's the founder of Contract Nerds and the author of Contract Redlining Etiquette. I don't know if you can see this, if Zoom is going to let me, but I have the book. It's here. Bought it myself, I promise. I had it perfect before we started, and then my mind got scrambled. But it's Nada Alnajafi. Nada Alnajafi. There we go. Nada Alnajafi. So thank you, Nada, for putting this presentation together. For those of you who are here for the first time, let me give you a quick bit of background. In-House Connect started 11 years ago as a New York City-based meetup group for in-house counsel. Every month, In-House Connect would organize free CLE classes hosted by different law firms, which were followed by cocktail networking receptions. And every 6 months, we would organize fun and festive networking mixers. And fun fact, actually, Jerry and I met. Jerry was an attendee of our first events back when we did things in person. So it's cool to come full circle on that.
It's amazing. 11 years later, still. So it's really, really grown, Shai.
Thank you, Jerry. It's great to have you here with us, and thanks for your support. Over the years, we've helped thousands of in-house counsel connect with peers and outside counsel alike, and the group was humming along, and then, of course, COVID hit, so we couldn't meet in person, so we went online, which has been a fantastic transition. We've been able to attract a much larger audience of in-house counsel, truly from coast to coast. We've been able to facilitate way more networking, relationship building, and we've been able to feature high-caliber speakers like the one we have today, who I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes. Tonight's event, or this afternoon's event, wherever you are, is Contract Redlining Best Practices for In-House Counsel. Our speaker tonight is Nada Alnajafi. Nada is a seasoned in-house attorney, a creator of the Contract Nerds blog, and author of Contract Redlining Etiquette. Nada is currently serving as in-house counsel for Franklin Templeton. Over the past 15 years, she has worked for companies from various industries, focused mainly on buy-side commercial and technology transactions. She has implemented several different contract management solutions and built contract processes from the ground up. With her dynamic legal and consulting background, she's more than just an attorney. She's a trusted advisor, business partner, project manager, creative problem solver, and skilled negotiator. I know I speak for everybody on the program right now tuning in when I say that we're so excited to hear from the expert on contract redlines herself. And with that, I will turn things over to Nada.
Thank you so much, Shai. I'm so excited to be here with In-House Connect and with Jerry. This is going to be a great program. A little bit about me. Shai already went through a bit of my background, but I have been working with contracts for most of my career. I was trying to work out how many contracts have I probably seen over the past 15 plus years. And if I averaged one per day, I've seen about 5,000 contracts. So I love contracts. I nerd out on contracts. I refer to myself as a contract nerd. As if some of you might know, I also have a blog called Contract Nerds, where we send out a weekly newsletter and we publish a new blog post and we share free events about contracts, just like this one and many others from In-House Connect. I also recently published a book called Contract Redlining Etiquette, which contains 10 rules that really help us understand how to use redlines more efficiently. So with that, I'm going to get started. First, with a story about redlining gone wrong. This is actually a true story. So a couple years ago, I was representing a customer in a deal to renew their SaaS subscription for an additional 3 years. The parties had already completed commercial negotiations, and they sent the renewal order form to me for legal review. It was a simple one-pager. I noticed, though, that they had linked to their online terms and conditions instead of referencing the master services agreement that we'd already signed about 10 years prior. So I redlined that one portion and I sent it back for what I thought would be an easy approval. A couple days later, which were just one day before quarter end, They sent the renewal order form back to me, stating that they had accepted all of my changes and they already signed it, and please sign prior to quarter end by end of that day. Of course, before sending the contract out for signature, I reviewed the final draft. And while I was doing that, I noticed that something had changed. You see, the other side had added in a new phrase without using red lines or without otherwise indicating that they had made a change. The new phrase stated that the deal shall be non-cancelable for any reason. So I thought to myself, why would they add this phrase to a renewal order form? It must be because our MSA from the early 2000s afforded us as the customer a right to terminate for convenience. So I double checked, and it did. So now not only was this a hidden change, this was a material hidden change that we had to address. I notified my internal business client and they agreed. We had to schedule a call and talk about it ASAP. We joined the call with the vendor's sales rep and the vendor's in-house counsel. And immediately they were visibly upset, short, and curt with us. They insisted that the non-cancelable phrase had to stay in. We went back and forth a couple of times, and the vendor's in-house counsel said that we had to keep the phrase in or they would reduce our renewal down from 3 years to just 1. At $100,000 a year, they sacrificed $200,000 just like that. Don't worry, by the end of the call, we convinced them to keep the 3-year renewal and remove the non-cancelable phrase. I'll share my negotiation strategy with you later, but the damage had already been done. My internal business client lost all trust in the vendor, and ultimately, my client decided they didn't want to spend another 3 years in business with them and willingly reduced the renewal order to just 1 year so that they could find another provider within that time frame. Now, I'm sure many of you have experienced similar instances of poor redlining etiquette and have seen how this can negatively impact the business and slow down the negotiation process. In this example, there were a few problems that led to the demise of the relationship. Had they thought more strategically about the process, they could have avoided it. First, they didn't use red lines. Second, they didn't communicate even via email that a change had been made to the order form. Third, they didn't bring up the material change during commercial negotiations earlier on. Fourth, they didn't take responsibility for the mistake. And lastly, they didn't negotiate for a solution. They demanded it to be their way. In this example, poor redlining etiquette resulted in more negotiation cycles, longer closing times, lost revenue of $200,000, and the sales rep lost his commission, broken trust between the parties, the company's brand was tarnished, and so was the personal reputation of the in-house counsel and the sales rep involved. These are just some of the problems that we face when we don't treat redlining as an important skill that it is. So let me ask you in a poll. Let's do poll number 1, Shai. I'd like to know, where did you all learn how to redline contracts? I personally learned how to redline contracts on the job, and I have a feeling that that's going to be the answer here. We're starting to see law schools include redlining skills as part of their curriculum, which is awesome. There's also, sometimes some corporate training involved. Curious if there are any other ways that you guys might have learned how to redline contracts, but I literally learned how to redline by watching my very first boss as an intern in law school do it. And at that time, we used red pens and we used fax machines to send drafts back and forth before we had everything set up via email. So we've definitely come a long way. Yep, it looks like it. 96% of people learn how to redline on the job. The problem with learning how to redline on the job is that one person is learning from the other is learning from the other. Who's to say that the person we learned redlining from did it the right way or the best way? Have we really slowed down and taken a second to understand, what is redlining? So today it's thought of by many as just a technical skill, and it's associated with negative feelings and negative tones. Some common words I've heard people use to describe the contract redlining process is they're just markups. They're so frustrating to go back and forth. They're totally untrustworthy, time consuming, it's not fun, and it's just a means to an end. So here's a process that many people don't enjoy, yet we have to use almost every day in our practice as in-house counsel. How can we make it better? Well, there's redlining, and then there's what I call smarter redlining. Smarter redlining is efficient, effective, persuasive, collaborative. It's a negotiation strategy. I say that we should treat redlining like the important skill that it is. Be smarter and more strategic with our approach. Smarter redlining means strategically using red lines and explanatory comments to persuade the other side to accept your proposed changes while driving the negotiation forward efficiently and effectively, ultimately resulting in a good contract. My method on contract redlining etiquette includes 10 practical rules that can help us as in-house attorneys run our red lines more efficiently. I'm going to discuss 3 of my favorite rules today rather than going through all 10 of them. So rule number 1 is always use explanatory comments. The more people understand you, the more likely they are to agree with you. So when we're negotiating contracts, how can we get people to understand why we're requesting the change that we're requesting? It's simple, by using explanatory comments. So when we talk about red lines, most of us already know that redlining is the editing or markup process of the contractual document itself. The words, the terminology, the clauses, the phrases, the commas, the formatting, everything inside the 4 corners of the document. But most redlining tools, whether it's Microsoft Word or we're going to see Jerry show us with Contract Pod AI, they also contain a comment feature. It can be on the right margin, the top margin, the bottom margin, but it's there. And we can use these comments to explain the change that we made in the red lines, to persuade the other side to agree to our position and accept our red lines. We can use them to track internal approvals and decisions. We can use them to run meeting agendas that help us negotiate the contract. We can ask clarifying questions to the other side. What does this term mean? What did you mean by this? Why is this here? And we can use it to build internal alignment, which I'm going to talk about next. Now, you can't just write anything in the comment box and hope that the other side's going to agree with you. We have to be strategic about what we put in the explanatory comment. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to ask you guys, what if I told you that there is a secret power word that you could use to get the other side to agree with your change more often? What do you think that power word would be? Go ahead and put it in the chats. One power word that if you used it more often in your explanatory comments, it's more likely that the other side is going to agree with your change. I'm seeing please, you guys are very polite. As suggested, also very polite and professional. Yes, these are all great. And I would say keep using all of those. A couple of you have said the secret word. The secret word is because. And you don't have to just take my word on this. There have been studies in social psychology that have shown that people resist change unless you give them a good enough reason to do something differently. If they don't know or they don't understand the reason that you're asking for the change, they will probably resist making the change. Other studies have shown that using the word because is a powerful way of getting someone to change based on what you're requesting. I'll tell you a little bit more about one of the studies that I really thought was just fascinating. It's called the copy machine experiment. In the copy machine experiment, the subjects were asked to approach a long line of people waiting to use a busy copy machine on a college campus and ask if they could cut in line. The subjects were given 3 different scripts that they would use to make the request. The first phrase was, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?" That resulted in a 60% success rate. The second phrase was, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies?" Immediately, the success rate jumps from 60% to 93% simply because of the word because. As you can see in this second phrase, they didn't really give a good reason. I need to use the copy machine because I need to use the copy machine. It's a bit circular and really, not that special. The last phrase is, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use a Xerox machine because I'm in a rush?" Now, there is a legitimate reason that someone is asking to cut in line ahead of a bunch of other people. The difference in success rate between the second and the third phrase was only 1%. So what we gather from this study is that the word because was very powerful. The way that we think on autopilot as human beings, as soon as we hear the word because, we automatically associate it with a reason. And when we're given a reason, it makes us more likely to comply with it. The studies also showed that when the stakes are low, the word because doesn't have to be followed with a real reason because of this autopilot mode. So just hearing the word because was enough to elicit the response. But when the stakes are high, the word because needs to be followed with a good reason. According to this study, once compliance with the request required a modicum of effort, that's when the reasoning had to be good because that thoughtful response was taking place. And when you're being thoughtful about something, you really are looking for a good reason to do something and to change the way you're already doing it. So how does this connect to the way that we use comments? To use comments successfully, we can draw from the copy machine experiment the following conclusions. One, red lines with explanatory comments are going to be more successful than red lines without explanatory comments. In addition, small or minor red lines with a brief explanation will be more successful than small or minor red lines with no explanation at all. But with substantive red lines that have good explanations, they're going to be more successful than substantive red lines with a poor explanation or no explanation at all. We'll show you how this looks in sample red lines that I'll get to at the end of this. But if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation today, it's that explanatory comments are your tool to help you drive the negotiation forward and help you build negotiation leverage and help you get the other side to understand the reasoning for your ask. Use the word because or similar phrasing wherever you can. I have seen this in practice and you will see the benefits immediately by using the word because. So we talked a little bit about how to use comments. Now let's talk about when to use comments. The rule is always use explanatory comments, but as we know, there is an exception to every rule. So here are a few exceptions. In this cheat sheet, there on the left side is a list of different scenarios in which we see ourselves in when we're redlining contracts. There is definitely use if needed, or you don't need to use. We definitely want to use explanatory comments with substantive redlines. We already talked about it from the copy machine experiment, and it makes practical sense. When you're making major changes, you need to explain why. When you're working with an unrepresented party on the other side who doesn't have legal counsel or a savvy contract representative, it's also a really good idea to be a little bit more thorough with your comments, kind of anticipate the questions that they're going to have. The better that you're able to connect with and understand the other side in your first round, the less negotiation rounds you're going to need later on. Also, when you're working with an international party who may not speak your language as a first language, it's good to bridge that gap, or parties who do speak the same language but are from different jurisdictions may not be familiar with the laws that are applying to this contract. You can also use explanatory comments to help guide them. When we're working with outside counsel, I recently engaged outside counsel to help with a contract review. It was a niche field that was not part of my specialty, and they sent me red lines without any explanatory comments, not even explaining to me the reason for the changes. So I would include that as, now going forward, I've learned that lesson, included as part of my requirements to outside counsel is provide explanatory comments to me as the in-house counsel and provide a second set of comments that would be external facing to the other party that we're working with. Whenever you're explaining sweeping changes, like if we want to change a confidentiality clause from being one-way to mutual, you don't have to leave a comment for every single change that you're making. You can leave one comment for the clause that says, since we're also sharing confidential information with you, we'd like this clause to be mutual. See my changes below. Always ask clarifying questions using comments. It's a lot better than sending questions via email and then attaching your contract separately. The more that we can keep everything within the four corners of the contract, the more efficient you're going to be able to run your red lines, and you're really going to be able to cut down on the amount of time that it takes you to redline contracts. Use if needed is kind of, these are all use at your own discretion, of course, but you may not need to use comments if you're adding or responding to some standard common red line. If you can grasp why, and you can anticipate that the other side will understand why, you may not need to. But if you're ever in doubt, I would err on the side of adding an explanatory comment, even just a quick phrase that helps guide the other side. Sometimes we have lots of different documents and exhibits and addenda or web links. So adding explanatory comments to help with cross-references is really helpful, because just using them to organize everybody in the negotiation process, that's really going to save us a lot of time. When you're rejecting proposed changes, you don't have to leave a comment unless something is disappearing. We'll talk about disappearing red lines later and how to avoid that. You definitely don't need to use comments when you're accepting changes. So if all you're doing is accepting, that's the goal. We want to close out open red lines. And if all you're doing is accepting, then the other side's going to be okay with it. If you've gone back and forth, let's say on an indemnification provision, and this has been a major open item that's been holding up your negotiations, and you feel that it's important to let them know, all right, fine, we finally agree, then you can leave a quick comment. But you certainly don't need to leave an accepted comment every time you accept red lines. When you're making formatting changes, you also don't need explanatory comments. You might want to use silent red lines strategically. I'm not going to talk about silent red lines today, but it is in my book and we can talk about it at another point. So this is a nice cheat sheet that's part of the PowerPoint materials you guys will receive, and you can print it out and have it as a quick, easy reference if that's helpful. Let's ask poll number 2 now, Shai. Poll number 2 is, have you guys ever received a contract from the other side containing lots of red lines and 0 explanatory comments? So you get their red lines, they've marked it up and it's all red, but there's no explanation of why. Why did they make this change? Why did they add that? Why did they reject that? So just as I suspected, 94% of you have received a red line draft containing 0 explanatory comments. So this is inefficient, it's frustrating, it leads to more negotiation cycles. When you don't understand why they did it, you're probably just going to go back and ask them, hey, why did you delete this? Why did you add this? So that's just adding on another negotiation cycle that's going to take a day or two or a week of 2 to get responses back on. And our goal is, let's negotiate contracts faster and more efficiently. So if your counterparty does not provide sufficient explanatory comments, there's a few things you can do to keep the negotiation on track. The appropriate response here is the one that will engage your counterparty's cooperation and successfully and timely close the negotiation out for your client. So make sure you adjust your approach based on the level of criticality and urgency of the deal. The first approach that I would recommend is request that the other side add comments. You know, one option is that when you're sending it back, you can politely ask them to add comments, particularly if they've made a lot of unclear or overreaching edits. But the key is to explain your why and because of your ask. So the concept that we learned about the power of the word because doesn't only apply to contract negotiations, it applies to all negotiations or anytime you're asking someone to change the way that they're doing something. So when you ask the other side to fill in explanatory comments in the version, you can do it in a polite way and something like, hey, to help us better understand your position, can you please add explanatory comments and send this back? And then afterwards, we can schedule a call to chat about the open items. So now you've told them that it's in their best interest to explain to you why they included certain red lines. Now, yes, you're putting the contract back in their hands, which means it could take more time for them to get back to you. So obviously, you know, driving the contract forward is the key goal here. Don't do it if, you know, you're dealing with slow counterparty or anything like that. Do it when it's the right situation, the right scenario. The second approach you can take is to just give it a review and immediately schedule a call. When you review the contract and you only have a couple questions about why certain changes were requested, schedule the call to talk about those open red lines. What you can also do when you're scheduling the call is you can, send a note saying, hey, I reviewed everything, it looks good, but we have a couple open items that I want to discuss. Let's schedule a meeting And if possible, can you send an updated version explaining just why you made changes in the indemnification clause? That way I can prepare prior to our call. Again, you're explaining why it's in their best interest. You're being a little bit more narrow in the scope of your ask, and it's not a requirement. You're still going to have the call regardless of whether they send you back explanatory comments or not. But what we're doing here is we're flagging this to the other side, to someone who might not be used to using explanatory comments, or maybe didn't learn it from the mentor that they learned redlining from. So they might say, yeah, maybe comments are helpful. And you're just kind of like getting them to think about it for the next time. Most of us probably just end up reviewing the contract as is, drawing assumptions as best we can, and making our best guesses. And probably what that means is that you're rejecting many of the red lines that don't have explanatory comments. Why? Because you don't understand them. So it goes back to the concept that we already talked about. If I was on the other side, I would want to make sure that the person I'm sending my red lines to is giving me as much credit and understands me as much as possible, so that it can lead to the most amount of accepted changes as possible. So I would want to do whatever is possible to get them to accept my changes. When you're reviewing as is, you're putting in the most effort that you'll have to put in to review that contract, which is why you're probably going to take shortcuts and just say, I don't get it, reject. I don't understand, reject. Our policy is no, I'm just going to reject it. So again, where it's appropriate, where it's right, try to bring up the process of using explanatory comments, because it will help drive the process a little bit faster towards closing. But always remain polite and professional, of course. Okay, so the next rule we're going to talk about is rule number 5, use internal red lines to build internal alignments. So the more successful your negotiation is, your internal negotiation is, the more successful your external negotiation would be. After all, the internal negotiation is how you prepare for the external negotiation. And in my redlining gone wrong example at the beginning, what happened was we were all on video. The vendor's sales rep and the in-house attorney were clearly misaligned. It was obvious to me that they didn't have a chance to discuss the matter before the call. So when the in-house attorney threatened to lower our renewal period from 3 years down to 1 year, the sales rep's face completely changed. He was not expecting to lose 2/3 of his commission just like that. He did not agree to that approach. So being misaligned with your client makes your negotiation vulnerable to interception. As soon as I noticed that they were not aligned, I began directing my negotiation to the sales rep. I talked to him and I said, hey, I'm sure you don't want to give up 2/3 of your commission. We're ready to sign this. We're ready to sign this deal with a 3-year renewal. But this was a last minute change that we weren't expecting. Let's do something here. Let's not lose this deal or decrease the renewal period just because of this one misunderstanding. So what happened was, of course, his sales rep wasn't willing to give up his commission for a redlining mistake that he didn't even create. The sales rep was now on our side, and he was now pushing his own in-house attorney to close the deal with a 3-year renewal period. Had the vendor used internal red lines, they would have been more prepared for the negotiation, and they would have had a different solution prepared. So let me ask you this in the chats. What's one thing that us as in-house counsel cannot finalize a contract without? One thing that we as in-house counsel can't finalize a contract without. Let me look at the chat. Client approval, client consent. Yep, approval, commercial team approval, authority. Yeah, you guys are spot on. Your internal client. Your internal client is the one thing that you can't finalize a contract without. After all, as in-house counsel, we're reviewing contracts for goods and services that our business clients want to sell or purchase. So sure, we might be procuring legal services once in a while and be both the client and the counsel, but in most cases, we're the counsel. We offer our advice so that our business clients can make informed decisions. So if we need our internal client in order to finalize the contract, then we need to involve them early on. and align with them throughout the entire contract review and negotiation process. Now, when you have your internal clients and multiple internal stakeholders, it can get a little confusing and disorganized and difficult to track all the different communications and approvals and thoughts from everybody. I remember back in the day, I'd manage internal negotiations by having in-person meetings separately with each of my internal clients or stakeholders, and then taking meeting minutes and action items and notes and trying to understand what each, different department needs, and then putting my notes together and trying to update a draft of the contract. Or I'd send lengthy emails, copy pasting clauses from the contract and say, what do you think about this section? And there it is, a long email that they have to respond to in a different color. But generally, this is pretty time consuming and confusing. My internal clients would reach out saying, what does this all mean? Or do I really need to read all of this? Or can you just highlight the important parts for me? See, those methods were inefficient because they relied on the client to understand the legalese of the contracts and to have enough time to read the entire contract and translate it for themselves. This made them feel overwhelmed, which would lead to shutting down, frustration, and delayed input. Sometimes, especially back in the day, a lot of contracts might have been executed without even having input from the internal client. So how can we run internal negotiations more smoothly and engage client participation? By using internal red lines. So we take the same concepts that we already talked about redlining and explanatory comments, and instead of addressing the external party that we're negotiating with, we use the red lines to address the internal client. And that's what internal red lines are. They're red lines drafted for an internal audience only. You can use internal red lines to gather information and requirements from your internal stakeholders, ask them questions, flag risks, ask requests for approval. And sometimes you might even be negotiating with your internal client and trying to convince them to agree or disagree with something that you believe is in the company's best interest as in-house counsel. With internal red lines, it's a lot easier to delete comments that were already resolved and then fine-tune them and rephrase them for the external audience. You don't have to deal with all of these separate emails or communications that happened over the phone or things you might have forgotten, or you have to open up your meeting minutes. Everything is, again, within the four corners of the document, and you can save your internal red lines as an internal draft, and you can mark it as internal only. Of course, we want to be careful as in-house counsel not to accidentally disclose attorney-client privilege communications or attorney work product. So we have to be careful with the way that we label the file names and the way that we label the internal red lines. One method that I really like to use is a color coding method. I'm going to show you that in a second, but let's run poll number 3, please, Shai. Poll number 3, I'm asking you, what tool do you prefer to use for redlining? Is it Microsoft Word, Google Docs, or do you like to use another CLM platform or something else? I'm going to guess most people are going to say Microsoft Word. Yep, 98% Microsoft Word. So this color coding method will definitely be useful because you can use it in Word, you can use it in Google Docs, and a lot of CLM platforms will have internal collaboration capabilities, which Jerry will show you that Contract Pod AI has. So we'll see that from him in his demo in a little bit. The beauty of using a color coding method is that it makes it easier and faster to visually filter the internal red lines before sharing the version with the other side. So with internal red lines, we use the comments section in the margin, and we use highlighting colors to distinguish between internal versus external. You'll see my little legend here in the top left. I like to use the blue highlighted color for internal or business client red lines. And then I like to use yellow for comments going to the vendor because they're pending. And I like to use green as action items to myself or notes that I need to follow up on. You can use whatever color you want. The important thing is that you keep track of them and that you use these colors to align with your internal client. So if we're looking at this example contract and the example explanatory comments, I've marked up all of the internal red lines. I've also done some of my external comments. I've done my notes to myself. And when I email this to my business client, I'm going to use the colors to help direct their attention. hey, business client, please see an updated internal redline version attached. See the comments highlighted in blue for your attention, and please respond by replying to that comment inside of the document. You might see some other colors. Those are notes to myself or comments to the vendor, but please review the ones in blue. So here you have really honed in and you've narrowed the scope of what you want your business client to focus on. You've made it really visually easy and clear for them to go right to what they need to get to, because everybody is just super busy and everybody's trying to do their review as quickly as possible. This makes it a lot easier. This also makes it easy to delete or rephrase or reconvert into an external facing comment whenever you feel that you've completed the internal discussion on it. And business folks love this. I've used this method and they've appreciated the clear direction and the specific set of requests. If you're using another redlining software that's not Word, they do have similar features. So I'll show you a little bit more about this in the sample redline example later, but that is it for internal redlines. Using the color coding method really drives efficiency. It keeps all discussions and all stakeholders within the same document so that everybody can see what the other person is working on. Leads to a lot of collaboration. Okay, the third rule that I'm going to talk about today is rule number 7. All red lines must be visible until final agreement. We have a transparency problem in the contracting practice. The thing is with contracts, the parties are drafting and negotiating and redlining one story, one document, one contract. By way of contrast, in litigation, each party gets to submit their own motion. But here, we're all working on the same document. So we're co-drafters of the same contract. When we have a lack of transparency, it disrupts the entire deal. As we've seen in my earlier example on redlining gone wrong, the lack of transparency in the process is what caused the problem. Had the vendor brought up their new requirement that they no longer accepted rights for termination for convenience, earlier on in the commercial discussion, the negotiation would have gone a lot smoother. One of the issues is that it was brought up really late in the negotiation process. It was brought up on the day that they wanted it to get signed. It was not highlighted as something that was negotiated between the parties. It was a little bit snuck in there. So this is an example of the transparency problem. This redlining mistake and the lack of transparency cost that company $200,000, and it resulted in my customer having to find a new provider. So in the redlining context, transparency isn't just an ethical responsibility, it's also necessary for efficiency and speed and business success in our line of work. Hiding changes slows down and disrupts the contract negotiation process. Regardless of whether it was a mistake or done on purpose, it really doesn't matter. It was still hidden from view at the time that it should have been brought up. The best way to achieve transparency during the contract negotiation is by keeping your red lines marked and visible until that red line has been resolved. When you keep the red lines visible, it leads to smoother, faster, and more efficient contract negotiations. You have more bargaining power during the negotiations, less confusion and clutter and human error, and more trust between you and your counterparties. So let's talk about one instance in which hidden red lines can kind of sneak up on us where we may not intend it, and it comes up as a mistake a lot of times. This concept of disappearing red lines. When the other side proposes red lines and they send it back to you with markups, and you then want to respond to their red lines, it can get a little bit tricky if you're just relying on the functionality of track changes or some other program. You want to always make sure that your counterparty can see what you did and that they can understand what you did. For example, the other side proposes a red line. You don't want to accept it. So some people just go and click the reject button. When you click reject, it disappears the red line. What happens when it disappears the red line is that the other side can't tell visually from glancing at the document later whether you accepted it or agreed to it. There's just no longer a markup, but they can't tell what happened. So in that case, I recommend backspacing rather than clicking the reject button. I'll show you an example of this, but it should be a strike through of the proposed red line rather than completely disappearing or removing the proposed red line, because you want the other party to see every move you make. Kind of like in a game of chess, you know, there has to be a piece that moved. If something disappears, nobody can see what happened. It's going to slow down the process. It's going to make them feel like you hid something when you probably didn't intend to. Also, when you are proposing a partial change to a proposed red line, let's say the other side proposes a sentence and you largely agree with that sentence, but you want to change one of the words. Instead of saying, for example, business days, you want to say calendar days. Make your new red line consecutively in the second order so that you can read from left to right, the oldest red line to the newest red line, just like you would read a book. Always ask yourself, can your counterparty see and understand what you did? That's the same thing that you would want if you were reviewing their draft. You would want to see, what did they change? So poll number 4, this is the last poll. Let me ask you guys, have you ever received a contract from the other side that did not highlight changes that were made? Have you ever received a contract from the other side that did not highlight changes, AKA hidden red lines, kind of like my redlining gone wrong story? As I thought, 91% of you are saying yes. That's a lot of hidden red lines. That makes for a really unreliable process. And honestly, the only way that we're going to change it is by starting to hold each other accountable for this. We have systems, we have processes. The systems are getting better at helping us track hidden red lines. But part of the responsibility is on us as a community, as in-house counsel, to try and really share the knowledge and share the expectation of, you know, what are we looking for here so that we can solve this problem. So if you receive a contract with hidden red lines, well, don't assume the worst right away, but also don't ignore it. Ignoring it only perpetuates the problem. So the first thing you can do is determine, was this hidden red line material to the deal? Like if it was just a formatting change, or they added a new signature line, or they updated the effective date to today's current date, things like that, it's probably not material, and you probably get why they just like quickly made that change without sending you another red line version. But if the hidden red line is a material change, like in my redlining gone wrong example, that was a material change. They were canceling our right to terminate for convenience, which has commercial impact as well as legal impact. Then we need to do something about it. We can't just ignore it, right? So first, notify your internal business client and be prepared to explain the implications to them. What happens if we just accept as is? What happens if we go back to them? There's pros and cons to both approaches. Come up with a plan together on how to address it. If you have a little bit of more time, I would absolutely go back to them. If it's an urgent deal and the internal client decides to internally approve the change, that's what you got to do, right? But come up with that plan together, strategize together. This is part of the internal preparation and internal alignment. If you do decide to address the hidden red line with the other side, I recommend bringing it up on the phone rather than an email. Difficult conversations are always a lot easier to have live than they are to have via email. I especially recommend turning video on. Like in my redlining gone wrong example, I made sure that to turn our videos on because I wanted to read their facial expressions. I really wanted to understand, was this an innocent mistake? Was this on purpose? Was it a process gone wrong? And see what the vendor's response would be. Of course, always give a benefit of a doubt. When you do bring up the conversation, it shouldn't be blaming or pointing fingers or why did you do this? I can't believe this. Just say, hey, you know, we noticed as we were giving it our final review that there was this change made and it was never brought to our attention in redlines. Can you help us understand? Ask an open-ended question. Give them a benefit of a doubt. See what they say. Use their response to help you negotiate the end solution. See, what happens when another party makes a mistake is, honestly, it does damage their negotiation leverage. So you don't want to be the party who makes a mistake. You don't want to be on the other end of that. But if you are, like in my example with the redlining gone wrong, I was representing the customer. Their mistake was in our favor. They made a mistake. It was a pretty big mistake and they had to own it. What I was expecting and what I've seen from successful outcomes is I expected them to take responsibility and to offer a solution where they negotiated for what they wanted. For example, had the vendor said, we absolutely need to have the non-cancelable language in, I'm really sorry, I must have made a mistake. I meant to present that to you as a red line. Please accept my apology. We do need it in. Can I offer you a 5% discount? Now we're negotiating again. But to threaten and to say, look, this is it, take it or leave it, or, we're going to reduce your renewal period, that's again damaging the relationship. So if you're caught on a side where you accidentally made the mistake, it's okay. Mistakes happen, but be upfront about it, be professional about it, and always remember that there's that customer service layer where it never feels good to feel like you can't trust the process or you can't trust the other party, especially in commercial relationships where we're working together. And the whole point of entering into this deal is because we want success for both parties and we want the contract to help us be successful in the long term. And always, 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 to make sure that you don't end up sending a contract out for signature that has something in there that you didn't mean to be in there, always verify your contract before sending it out for signature. A lot of people like to run their own red lines. That's absolutely the most efficient way to do it. When you're dealing with shorter contracts and people who've worked with contracts for a long time, you can eye it and you can kind of tell what the differences are. And now a lot of CLM legal tech solutions are starting to have more solutions that help us catch changes like that, which Jerry will show us that Contract Pod AI can do. But I really do hope that, what we take away from this is we can fix the transparency problem. We just need to be a little bit more upfront about it and try to address it rather than ignoring it, but also don't take it personal and don't let it damage the relationship. Always remember that the point is to drive the negotiation forward with red lines. Being efficient and tactical from the start is going to help you with that. So the key takeaways are that we want to use smarter red lines to help us drive the contract negotiation forward. We reviewed 3 out of 10 rules. Rule number 1 is always use explanatory comments. We talked about how to use explanatory comments and using the power word because whenever you can. We talked about when to use explanatory comments and when you probably don't need to, and you definitely don't need to. In rule number 5, it's leverage internal red lines to build internal alignment. We talked about the importance of the internal negotiation to help us prepare for the external negotiation and how to use internal red lines within the 4 corners of the document rather than sending out a bunch of separate emails or having a bunch of separate phone calls. Bring it all into the contract, and that really helps drive more internal alignment. Rule number 7, all red lines need to be visible until they have been resolved, agreed upon, whatever the case may be, because ultimately we need to solve this transparency problem by taking accountability for mistakes and helping be more diligent so that we don't make them in the first place. So now let's look at some sample red lines. Here's an example red line incorporating each of these concepts. In this scenario, party A is a corporate client who's looking to host a holiday event for their leadership team at party B's Brazilian steakhouse. They decide to use party B's event agreement template as the starting point. So party A is the first to redline. Party A reviews the event agreement and they mark it up with some internal red lines. So some of the internal red lines are, this first section is on headcount number. The in-house counsel for party A sees that there's still a brackets here for the number of guests, and they're wondering to the internal client, hey, did you already agree to a minimum headcount? So this is an example of using an explanatory comment, to help drive, some understanding with the internal client. And then here, there's another comment for the internal client, which is asking about, hey, when do you want to provide final headcount by? Because they can't change final headcount once they're committed to this notice date. So the comment is, you know, 30 days seems a little early, especially with the uncertainty of traveling during the pandemic. So they're advising that should we see if they'll agree to a shorter notice period. So here you're advising the internal business client, you're getting their input because they're probably more the expert on throwing events. The internal business client, I use IBC as short for internal business client in case you're wondering what that means. So the internal business client says, agreed for similar events. We've been confirming final guest count a week before the event. So now you have some context from your internal business client, and party A converts the input into red lines and converts the internal red lines into external facing comments. So instead of asking what minimum headcount did you agree to, it now says, hey, party B, during the call last week, we agreed to the minimum headcount of 100. So this is explaining where this number came from in case legal counsel's reviewing the contract and they also weren't on the call. So this gives a little bit of that context. And then here they also converted the comment to say the negotiation piece, which is, look, you know, 30 days was too long. We're seeing people needing to make decisions a little bit closer to the event because of COVID, and we have people coming from the East Coast. Because of this, we prefer 3 business days as the time frame that we provide final agreement. So then they send that over. This is where these are some example annotations showing you when the comments were used. Here, we didn't use comments for everything. So we're seeing that, okay, while party A was reviewing, they also noticed that we keep repeating minimum guest count, minimum head count, as stated above multiple times. So they just made it into a defined term for more consistency. But we didn't need to explain why we made it a defined term. It's pretty clear why. It's used 6 different times in this clause. So that's an example of where you wouldn't need to use an explanatory comment because in your judgment, it was self-explanatory. Now, party B reviews and they respond to party A's red lines within the comments. Party B was fine with the change of the minimum head count of 100 guests. So they accepted the red line and then they resolved this comment. I like resolving comments because it shows that it's there and it grays it out, but it doesn't delete it altogether. So that when party A gets it back, they can see party B addressed it and they were fine with it. This comment remains open and party B responds to it because it's an open negotiation. So party B responds and they're like, we get it, the pandemic, but we need more than 3 days notice. You know, we need to order food, we need to schedule staff accordingly. They give their because. And then they say as a compromise, we can agree to reduce the notice period from 30 days to 10 days. So now you see party B's red lines come in a different color. They're in blue and they are consecutively after the red lines. So the first proposal was 30, the second proposal was 3, and the most current third proposal was 10 days. And we see it in that consecutive order. It makes it really clear to understand who inputted what. They did not just simply reject the insertion of business. They backspace deleted it so that it was stricken through and it still remained visible. If party B had just clicked reject on the business insertion, it would have disappeared. Now, when party B sends it to party A, it's very clear. They accepted everything they were okay with. We are still in discussions on the notice period. Party B would rather do 10 days. I see that they deleted business from business days. So now I feel like everything is transparent. So that was just a quick example. I didn't want to get too complicated and do a legal clause, but just a quick example of showing how we can clearly use red lines to help us drive the negotiation process forward. These are the annotations explaining. This is part of the materials that were sent to you. And that's it. So thank you all so much for joining. I really enjoyed talking about contract redlining etiquette. You can check out the book on Amazon if you'd like, and I'll pass it over to Shai.
There was a lot of great discussion in the chat that I would love to get to, but first I want to turn things over to Jerry. I'm very interested to see how Contract Pod AI handles contract red lines, and I'm interested to see the platform in general. And then after his demo, we will have questions, and I'm gonna give some more love to the chat.
While I am sharing, as you probably know, I can see people put chat bubbles up, but I can't always tell what you're saying. So if it's really important, Shai can interrupt me. But I wanted to give a brief preview of Contract Pod AI. I've been here for about well over a year. I was actually a customer before starting it. And I'm going to walk through very quickly the upload, redline, converse scenario in Contract Pod AI. So with that, this is our dashboard. Very clear. We actually can be in dark mode, right? We're in dark mode right now just to go out to take a look at this. I'm going to create a new legal request. Now, Contract Pod AI at its core, we're a contract lifecycle management system. We do end-to-end contract lifecycle management. For today, we're just going to kind of go through the really cool redlining stuff that we can do. And as you might imagine, I use the platform. I'm a lawyer. I've been doing this for a while. I love talking about what we're doing, and I love showing off how cool the system can really be. You're watching me as I go through right now the general setup of a new customer, a new request in the system. And so what you're watching is how you build in your first request. So we're going through this, and you're watching me fill it out. This is the request form. You can see what's going on here, and we'll get to this point where we upload the contract. Now, I'm actually going to use our master service agreement, even though I typically try not to mark up my document before sending it. What goes on is it goes in. As soon as it's in, the AI starts running, extracting terms, and telling you what's in here. We do have a number of things we can do. While the AI is running on this one, I actually did take the opportunity to upload a couple different versions so that I'm not wasting time. The AI is pretty fast, but what you see here is our snapshot page, the summary page that tells you all about what's in your contract. And what we've had actually is had the AI already run, pull out the clauses that I asked it to look for, in this case, assignment, indemnity, intellectual property, waiver, and tell me what is compliant, what's not compliant according to my playbook. Now, you don't have to have a playbook. We do give you about 2,000 different clauses you can work with. But when you have the playbook, you can really use a lot of the redlining functionality in the system. So you'll see that some of these are labeled as non-compliant. Now, I am I find it very important to go through and see everything. But again, we've got a few minutes here to go through this. So I'm just walking through redlining and negotiation in Contract Pod. So one thing I want to show is what we call contract risk and compliance. Now, if you're looking here, what you can see is a document. Now, we show you the document, and you'll see that some of these are located in purple highlight. As I go here, you can actually see the lines that we found, and boom, I'm actually able to take my playbook language and automatically put it in. Now, this is good. You're going through it. You can find things that you want to find very quickly. We can tag it as being compliant. Maybe we have to use fallback text, or maybe we accept the risk on this waiver clause saying that, this matches. Once that's done, I can go into our collaboration tool. Now, Nada really wants me to show you two things here. She thought this was really cool. I will show you one in this view, and then we're going to jump into another view and take a look at this. So we do actually have a fully Word-compatible editor in here. We also have a Word plugin that you can do this in. All of this is available and running within the system. As you're seeing, it's loading here as we're talking. If I go through the document, you'll see that the changes I just made a moment ago should show up. May still be building the red lines in, but there we go. So the changes I made did show up. Now, maybe I really want to add additional changes. I can click delete. I can type whatever I want. I enjoyed Nada's presentation, and I can go on with that. Save and close. It will save my document, take my red lines, keep them in the document. And once that's done, it's going to bring it in. I'm going to get back out of this page. The page is going to be reloading, and we're going to start seeing those key obligations, our key terms start refreshing, revising, reloading, and the AI is working them out. Now, luckily, I actually don't know if you can see my browser because there we go. My browser stopped responding for a second, but I'm going to pull over to this other document that I have already done some work on. Now, you'll notice it says scorecard right here. Now, this is cool. What you do in the scorecard is it actually tells you whether or not we're hitting your risk profile. So, as I said earlier, you've got this risk profile set up with this earlier thing. It's telling me that, this document doesn't meet any of our typical needs for any of this. I then can go in, I can review the obligation terms again. I can see what needs to be redlined or changed. Again, I've done a few of these already, so it's showing you there. So, but what if I was working with, Nada? I could go ahead and add Nada as a collaborator. I'm going to make up an email address for her. This won't really work, but here you go. Now, I'm going to go to Nada and say, let's go ahead and work together in the document. I really want to redline with you. So I can actually send it right out to her. We can work in this just like we were working in Word, just like we were working on anything else, and be able to go ahead and see the collaboration in live. And you know how Nada was talking about internal comments versus external comments? I could actually set this up to tag internal folks and external folks as we go through this. So again, we've got this. I'm bringing up my add comment button here. I can go and say, at Nada, what do you think? Now, clearly I was not typing here as my first job. And we can always have that conversation. If we were working together, if she was in the file, we would be able to go to that. So I'm not going to save that right now because this one should be done running the AI. And I apologize, I'm waiting for my browser to catch up to my voice. But we do it quite a bit. We have the collaboration functionality, we have the automatic redlining. Of course, if I upload a version of this that has changes in it, the red lines will show up. And I'm sure you're noticing there is a compare button there that will tell you that there is some comparison. Again, I apologize, my browser has crashed because that is ultimately what you're always going to see when you're trying to show something off. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, see if it comes back. And if not, I will go back and load a new page. So 1 second, a bit of technical difficulty. I am going to reload my browser, enjoy the shouting of mommy from downstairs, and hi, daddy. Thank you, Shai, for laughing at this. I knew this was going to happen yesterday. I said it's going to go perfect during the test case, and then when I try to do it within the demo, my browser is going to crash. So let me bring that back up. Shai, are we okay?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. I'm just
so as we've seen, and again, I know I raced through this. We did see uploading a document. We did see changing the red lines and doing it through our built-in AI-based obligation term management. You've seen the collaboration function. And again, so we do have this versioning. We can run comparisons. So I know that earlier in the discussion, we were talking about what happens when you have two versions of the document, you have different versions. We track all that. So we will tell you all about that version, whether it's my upload, whether there's collaboration versions, whether they were created for collaboration, as you can see, created via collaboration, upload originally. If I run a comparison, I can compare two snapshot documents. And for those of you who have used those PDF versions of the software before, we have that same functionality. Now, as Nada was talking about, I'm actually a big fan of redlining, showing all my work, seeing different versions. So, this says there are no changes between the original modified document. If I go and I upload a new version, whether I do it in Word or not, I am going to just cross out a bunch of stuff, save it, and upload a new version. And let's go with lock collaboration so that we don't have anybody else trying to get in there. So Nada can't make changes anymore. We've agreed on our changes. I can then upload a new version, if say we were working offline, and see all the changes once it comes in to there. The AI is always running. Every time you upload a document, the AI runs again and gives you more things. So let's take a comparison again. Version 1 versus version 4, which I just uploaded. And here we go. You saw me delete that. You didn't see me delete a big section of text, but here I go. I took out the first top part of this entire document. I can save it, the red lines as a PDF. I can save them as a document file, however I want to do it. And of course, once we are done with that, I always have the option to send it for signature, go through whatever signature platform you use. We have a ton of really cool features. Normally the demo is about an hour long, 45 minutes to an hour long, but I wanted to get through and show you some of the really quick, cool things you can do. So now, whether you're sending this internally, like I said, you can collaborate internally. If you want to download Word versions or PDF versions, you can do that. You still have your scorecard running here in the background as it tells me I really haven't done much good work on my intellectual property clauses, my assignment clause, my waiver clause. We have a tremendous amount of powerful stuff, and all of this is backed with workflow, a customizable drag and drop workflow, translation features, all this really cool things. And then, of course, we get this asked a lot. Can you look at it in bright colors in day mode? Yes, if you really want to be in day mode and blast your eyes with white light, absolutely. Shai, I'm going to pause there. And I think if there's Q&A on whether it's Nada's Q&A, questions about the product, questions about how we redline individually, I am more than happy to take any of that. Pricing, just so you know, we are user-based. I just got that question. Sorry, Shai. We are user-based. It's based on the number of people in legal, users who need all the features, people in business, and people who don't have, and your employees who just may do requests or get a question once in a while. We're pretty flexible with that, and we'll try to price it to best fit your needs. And one of the things I say is I'm not a salesperson. Sorry, Ned, I'll give you back the floor in a second. I'm not a salesperson. So what I like to say is we want to work with you. We want to figure out a way to make it work for you. So to that end, if you are interested, by all means, drop me a line or on LinkedIn via email or reach out to Shai. He can reach me any time of day or night. But I'm probably the easiest Jerry Levine to find on the internet. If you search for me or you type my name in, I will show up. And again, there's voices from downstairs telling me about asking me what I'm doing. So I will pause there and let's go to Q&A.
All right. So first of all, again, if you have questions, thank you, Jerry. It was really cool to see Contract Pod AI in action. I've seen it a few times. I've had the benefit of seeing it a few times. I know many haven't. So it's great that you did that. Thank you. Of course, thank you, Nada, for a fantastic presentation. We had a ton of great commentary in the chat. It was really interesting. Again, folks, if you have questions, submit them. But just to recap a little bit of some of what the chat discussion was about. So there was a lot of talk about how to label internal comments versus external comments. That was very, there was a lot of good discussion on that. And Jerry, can Contract Pod, if I want to, label internal comments as internal or different color coding, you can do that?
Yeah, so actually each person will get a different color code, just like in Word. In the collaboration function,
Your little one wants to collaborate now, I know.
I have some active collaboration. Yeah, Shai, I have active collaboration right now. Everybody's going to start yelling now, so it picks up on the thing. But this is East Coast evenings from when we're doing things from home. So, Shai, to answer that question, everybody gets their own color coding. We do have a different way it shows up for internal collaborators versus external collaborators. There's also a different functionality based on. I am so sorry. Next time I'm going to have to go to my office to do this and just to make sure. But he's 8, and all he wants to do is talk about Minecraft, Roblox, and other things. So everybody does get their own color. We do that. We are working on making this a little better. There is someone who asked about, does this work with Google Doc? We are building the Google Doc plugin. Fortunately or unfortunately, the vast majority of folks are still in Word in legal. But if you do get an invite or you extract Google Docs if you click export your document, it'll work just fine. Nada, I think there's a really good question for you, but I'll let Shai take back over rather than running his show.
There's a couple of great questions. So we'll go with the question from James in the chat first. So what do you mean by silent redlining?
Hi, James. Great question. That could be a whole presentation of its own, but to summarize, there is a common strategy in negotiation to use silence to help create some space to make decisions and for the other side to say something. So if we're negotiating live, and I say my part and I say, actually I want XYZ for this price. And then I would be silent and I would give space to the other side to respond. It's a negotiation tactic because silence is awkward and people want to fill space. So when we are redlining contracts, we don't usually have that kind of space because we're redlining via email, but we can create similar movement in the negotiation process by purposefully and strategically not adding an explanatory comment when we're responding to the other side. So I'll give you just a quick example. You don't want to be silent with your own, let me say it again. You want to be, with silent red lines, you're being silent on your own red line, okay? You don't want to be silent on someone else's red line because then it looks like you agreed to it. So if Jerry and I are negotiating a contract, he proposes a red line and I'm silent, I don't accept, I don't reject, I don't respond, I don't leave a comment, he receives it back, he'll think that I agree and he accepts it. But if I assert a position and I do not leave an explanation, I can help move the negotiation forward whenever there's a difficult party, someone who's not complying with the redlining process, someone who's not cooperating. This is really good when someone's ignoring you, when you leave red lines and comments and they just delete them and they don't respond, when they're not getting back to you quickly, when they propose a really out there and totally unreasonable term, you can simply reject or delete and not leave a comment. Or you can reassert your red line and not leave a comment. What that says is, I'm not talking about this anymore. This is how it is. So you don't want to use it all the time. It can be a little controversial. It could be a little difficult. People can get upset, but you want to use it smartly and strategically. I do talk about it in my book, and I will talk about it in other presentations. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, we can talk about that some more.
Our next topic I want to talk about is a negotiation where there's lots of different red lines, lots of different collaborators. Somebody asked me if Contract Pod can support 30 or more collaborators. It can do hundreds, so it's very robust and can definitely do that. But it gets unwieldy, right? Generally speaking. So, do you have any tips or recommendations on how to manage that? Does it make sense at a certain point to pause, accept all of the changes that we all agree on, and then, start from that version? Or is there a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're working with a lot of different collaborators on a very lengthy contract, like a government contract or construction agreement or a merger and acquisition transaction, it can get complicated with so many red lines and layers. Usually the initial red line is going to be the lengthiest, and from there you taper down. That's usually the goal, but it's definitely an effective strategy to clean the version and restart from there, so long as you keep track of that red line version. So you make it clear, I have cleaned everything we've agreed on, clean up some comments so that we can remove some of the clutter. Let's start from this clean version if everyone's okay with that. Attached is the latest red line version as a reference. But just be clear about what you're doing and be transparent about the approach and get everyone's buy-in that now's a good time to do that.
I was going to say, thank you for pointing out the number that we can have in Contract Pod AI. We can have significant number. You can do the same thing in Word or Word Online and other functionality. The more people involved, the more difficult it gets, as Nada pointed out. There's really, it becomes a point where you have to decide. I almost have done, when I've done this in the past, I've almost had different groups or different sets of, we're only going to focus on these things today to try to avoid going through multiple areas or trying to keep that down. But what's nice about active collaboration tools, where you can actually see people doing things in real time, is that everybody can kind of work together rather than having that passing back and forth of multiple versions, which does make it a lot easier because you're seeing what's going on and you're going, hey, Shai, I can't let you do that because we're gonna do something else here. Let's try to keep this as easy as possible. But it also helps to get everyone on the phone or in a room together. As strange as that sounds after 2 years behind screens, it is very helpful.
I really love the collaboration feature that you showed, Jerry, because not all CLM systems actually tackle that area. But that's essentially what we're doing when we're negotiating a contract. We're collaborating the whole time. We're collaborating with our internal clients. We're collaborating with the external parties to build this deal in this one contract that we're all going to sign and we're all going to operate off of. So that's very central to what we do with redlining.
So I got a question for Nada, actually.
Sure.
What happens when someone sends you the wrong version of the agreement after you've marked it up? What's your recommendation for etiquette on that one? Because that's one of my favorites.
Ask them to send the right version.
So, okay, can I share? I've done that, but I actually had would you say, and I guess my question is this, and I had this happen to me, and it was actually one of the most delightful experiences I've had. Was one of my vendors sent me the wrong version of their purchase agreement. And we marked it up and sent it back and said, well, we said, we don't think that this is right. We're not sure if this is the right copy. And if, I feel like I would do the same, but if you've sent the wrong document to your counterparty, it might be nice if you take the pen the next time and do some of the redlining for them. It was actually probably the best relationship I've ever had with a counterparty, because when they apologized and marked it up for us and copied over our red lines, told us where everything had been, and even said, this isn't, they even told us these sections weren't in the agreement we originally sent you. It made the negotiation so much better. But that little bit of politeness, rather than saying, sorry, go ahead and do it yourself, made a huge difference. So just owning up to it is a huge part of this. And I know you spoke about that early. And I thought that's really a key thing.
So if you're receiving a version, the wrong version, but you've already marked it up, then that's exactly the right approach, Jerry. It sounds like your counterparty did the right thing. First of all, the negotiation begins with deciding which template to use. So are you going to use your template, third-party template? Whose template are you going to use? Which format is it going to be in, PDF or Word? I saw a lot of people talking about how they hate it when they receive a PDF version. I agree. Send it in Word. It's not going to get you any shortcuts. Everyone knows how to convert from PDF to Word now. It's not the same lock and key that it used to be. But if you've already started redlining the wrong version, it's absolutely on the party who sent you that template. They either have to just pick up from that template, which it seems like probably will have less favorable terms. They're not as updated, or they take the pen on looking at all of the things you already marked up and move it to the right template so that you don't have to go back and redo the same thing. And I would ask them to please highlight key differences between the old template and the new template so that you can go and look at those again. But we're negotiating with partners in these commercial deals. If you're negotiating like a litigation settlement agreement, that's a different thing. But with our partners, we want to continue working with them for a long time. So if a mistake is made, own it and make up for it and negotiate the solution. Don't just, leave it all on them.
I like that you say partners. We actually had our customers here at Contract.ai. We used to call the other party counterparty, and a number of our customers said, "Hey, can we change that to partner?" Because we look at our customers, our suppliers as partners, and they said, and believe us, at first we were like, well, that confused people. Are you actually thinking like, oh, we're partnering with them? They said, you know what, if we can't get that right, that's our problem. But it really, there's been this big shift, I think, in the past few years to really seeing in-house lawyers where we're going and saying, hey, we really want to make things happen. We want to make deals. And so we want to see the other side of the partner, not just as a nameless counterparty or, opposing counsel.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. I struggle with even the terminology to use in my redlining presentations because other side or counterparty, it suggests that you're not on the same team when in commercial setting you should be.
I've got some great questions on how to reject changes. So do you recommend, I personally like to accept and then delete their, basically show that I'm rejecting it. But how do you recommend, displaying the red lines and the rejections?
Yeah, make sure that it's visible. So backspace instead of clicking the reject button. The reject button is nice for formatting changes, but otherwise I don't use it the first go around. I will backspace and I'll make it apparent, visible to the other side that I did not agree with this and I struck it. And then when the next party receives my backspacing, they can just reject to clear it out. But each move should be marked by something visibly on the page. That's what I would do.
What about, let's say you agree to something and then the business changes their mind and you have to claw back that position? Does it happen often? And how do you deal with it?
So if the business made a call on something and you represented that to the external party, it's already been incorporated into the deal. Sure, we accept this limitation of liability cap. Business comes back later and says, nope, actually, I didn't get the approval I needed. It needs to be higher. That's more of a negotiation strategy than redlining, but I would negotiate for it. So again, it's something that we said we would agree to. Now we want to reopen that negotiation. In order to do that, I've got to give something to get something. So, hey, I know we already agreed to the limitation of liability cap, but we actually want to see if we can get a little higher. How about instead we can agree to remove this or change that you pick something that you know that they wanted, that they redlined for, and you kind of got to figure out that give and take and ask your business client, what are you willing to give up for this? How important is this to you? Because we already went to them. So just treat it like a negotiation and a give and take.
I have another great question so I think I understand the question. So I'll read it and hopefully I'll clarify to make it clear. If I receive a contract back where the counterparty has accepted some of my red lines and responded to some with comment and responded to some comments, but there are still some red lines that have not been accepted nor rejected and have no comments, is it safe or standard practice to assume that those red lines have been accepted? Did you understand the question? I have a take, not safe to assume that those have been accepted.
I go with Shy.
do not pass go, do not collect $200 on those red lines, but go ahead.
So I'll give an alternative perspective. There is confusion around this.
Yeah.
Okay. But generally, if you don't reject, you're accepting by default. And that's why I said you have to be careful with silent red lines. You don't want to be silent on the other party's proposed red lines because you need to respond. We always have to respond to every red line. Are we accepting? Then accept it and clear it. Are you rejecting? Then backspace it and leave a comment. Why are you rejecting it? Are you counter proposing? Then backspace the pertinent parts, add new red lines for the pertinent parts, add a comment to explain it. The lack of a response can lead to the assumption that you accept it, that you're agreeing to it. So be careful with that because some people just are, you're doing 30 contracts a day and you're just, they didn't reject, they didn't leave a comment, accept all. What you can do though, to be clear, is when you send the next draft, you can say, I just assumed that anything you didn't comment on, you agreed to, see attached, right? And so again, you want to just be clear about that, but it could be used, in your favor. So depends on which side you're on, which assumption you want to go with. But I lean towards being clear and being transparent.
Yeah. I actually made that mistake, earlier on in my career. It was a big problem, it was just a disaster. So I learned my lesson. I was doing like a side project for somebody and whatever. It was just led to a lot of confusion, but it worked out.
And then Shy bought me my first house. It was great.
The insurance carrier picked up the tab. No, just kidding. Okay, so I have some negotiation questions. What do you do? I'm paraphrasing this question, but what do you do when you're up against an adversary who basically says this is our standard, or this is standard in the industry, or that's our company policy and we can't change? How do you deal with that?
So there's a few things. One, I always look at, you do want to look at negotiating power. If you're a one-person shop and you're going up against, a Fortune 10 company, you're probably not going to have the negotiating power you have unless you're at a very specific knowledge area or specific area. But for most of these, if you have some data backing you up or information backing you up that you can get from various sources, it is helpful. And one thing that I found, and Shy, I apologize, there's a few organizations like World CC, World Commerce and Contracting, the ACC, and even Westlaw's Practical Law and LexisNexis's Practical Guidance, where they will tell you if things are actually market. And I think Westlaw actually has a tool called What's Market, where they will kind of go through and give you ideas of what people have agreed to recently. Now, a lot of that's for public companies, but especially with World CC, they will tell you if something is actually an industry standard or is somewhere out there. One of the areas that I've used that for before in the past has been to say, when someone tells me, no one has ever asked for us to go to agree to an indemnification on that topic. And I'll go and say, well, judging from World CC, they reviewed 12,000 contracts and 96% of the contracts show this exact language. So I don't believe it. Or, you may find out that they're really telling the truth. I know we as lawyers like to say, but no one has ever done that to us before. We like to, these are negotiation tactics. We do want to stand up for our position. The other thing to look at is some of the new projects out there for standardization, whether it's bond terms, common paper, or one NDA. I think it's now clause stack, where they're beginning to work with groups of attorneys all over the world to standardize some fairly default agreements, whether it's cloud services terms, NDAs, data processing agreements. And you can actually start looking at those to see whether something is really considered a global or industry standard. If you really are up against the wall, you know, I know it's hard, but sometimes you got to you got to go and push and say, why? What is the reason for this? Because, and it's asking for that explanation because, you know, maybe there is a good reason. I always push for one line in NDAs because I ended up in one of those very rare non-disclosure breach lawsuits years ago in my earlier life. And so from that point on, I've always demanded to have one clause in an NDA because I'm once bitten, twice shy. But other times it's just, you know, our CEO hates that. Our GC or CLO said we need to do this every time, and you know it isn't until, and unfortunately, especially when you're a younger attorney, you may not know. You may just have been told this is the rule. Always put that in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with those points. And I would say that if you're a little closer in bargaining power, one thing I like to do to try to unlock the conversation is to ask an open-ended question. Like, oh, can you help me understand why this is your policy? Or is there anything that you are willing or your lawyers are willing to take a look at? Asking open-ended questions, just, you know, people want to come to you with responses. So they'll go back, they'll ask a question. You'll find an open window when you do that, usually. And another thing is, if they're not willing to make any changes, your bargaining power is not equal, then think of one thing that you want. Isolate one thing that is really important to your client and just go for that. Say, look, okay, fine, we're not gonna approach you with the 5 things that we wanted to redline, but this is important. This is a showstopper. We need to get this in. Can we please just talk to you quickly about this? Being persistent helps in those situations, whether you partner with the internal business client and have them go through their business channels, or whether, you know, you try to get a call scheduled with the other side's in-house counsel.
One thing, by the way, some of you, when you're the lawyer and you're dealing with someone who's restricted in what they can choose on the other side, like sometimes we find ourselves negotiating with a procurement manager and they won't put the lawyers on the side. Sometimes you just have to keep pushing till you get to the lawyer, because oftentimes and again, it's really important. The jobs the procurement folks do, the contract managers, they may have strict rules because it's there for a reason. But you know, oftentimes I've said, look, can I please speak with someone who in the legal department? I understand your point. We can't agree to this. So we're at a crossroads. And sometimes just getting up there, you find out that it's important because of this reason. But if you, again, like Nada said, if you can avoid that or give something in return or find a reasonable position with someone who has the authority to make that change, it's really good. You know, I also see the other side, and I think Melinda Ugrias asked this. What happens when the other side says there's too many red lines and they're not doing anything? That's a tough one. Again, I think you've got to go back and either, if it's really that bad, I think sometimes you have to be ready to walk away. Walking away is always an option. I mean, it may not seem like one, and the business may complain, but if it's really a risk problem for the company, for your client, you may have no choice but to say, we can't do this deal. We cannot agree to this. Therefore, unfortunately, we can't go forward. And it happens, and no one likes it. But you know, I flew to Singapore once to close a deal, and when we got there, the party told us they wanted a $4.5 million discount, and our price was $5 million, and they wanted And we just got up and said, there's no way to do this. I mean, I enjoyed Singapore, but it was beautiful. I had a great time, but sometimes you just have to say sorry. It's that's the end of the road. I wish you the best of luck next time.
I know there's do you want to add anything to that, Nada? Okay, so I think I heard a phrase or a concept before with relationships. The person who cares the least about it has the most power. That kind of like shakes out in contract negotiation. So I want to thank Nada and Jerry again for the wonderful presentation and the wonderful advice. Everybody who attended this presentation got a ton of fantastic advice. So I know many are grateful for that. All are grateful for that.